Well, hello, friends, and welcome to the August 2nd edition of Weekly Witness. That's right, we have made it to August. This is our August 2nd edition of Weekly Witness, which is Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. And so I want to start today with a quick recap of where we are, since we haven't had a live Weekly Witness episode in 2 weeks. Last week, we had recorded content from our rally. The week before, we were actually having our rally at this time. So quick recap, we are about 25 days into a 30-day called special session of the Texas legislature, which is highlighted by efforts to pass voter suppression bill, but there are about a dozen items on the governor's call for this special session. If you want more information about that, you can go check out our July 6th special session preview episode where we talk through all of the different items that could be covered. So about 4 days into this 30-day called special session after a marathon 24-hour weekend hearing on the House voting bill, the House Democrats broke quorum to keep the voter suppression bills from moving forward in the process. There is a lot of national press or other stories that you can read about that, but there's certainly been a lot going on over the course of the last 3 weeks, but not a lot of legislative updates. There have been about a dozen voting rights rallies at the Capitol, at least a dozen, including Texas Impact's Let My People Vote rally, which had about 500 attendees. So what's been made clear over the course of the last few weeks is that Texans of faith support voting rights. You can see clips of that rally, including high-profile religious and civil rights leaders, in the Weekly Witness podcast feed or on Texas Impact's YouTube channel. We hope that you'll check those out and share those with your friends, especially the speakers from your own faith tradition or the speakers who really spoke to you. This last weekend, there was a march to the Capitol, and Texas Impact provided an overview of the voting bills and provided homework assignments related to election infrastructure and mobilization. You can find that video on Texas Impact's channels as well. But here today to provide some of the highlights from that training are Texas Impact's own Executive Director, B. Moorhead, and our Advocacy Director, Josh Houston. B. Josh, thanks for joining today. How are you surviving this time period that's usually kind of a restful time post-legislative session?
The one big thing I'll say is the weather is surprisingly cool. So that's been an unexpected blessing.
Weather related, I'm hoping we make it through this podcast recording. I've got lightning going on all around me, so we'll pray really hard that the Wi-Fi and electricity hold. Josh, you surviving your what should be a summer vacation right now?
I'm here.
You are here. So let's jump right in. That's Josh's cue. He's ready to start talking for real. So Josh, let's talk process a little bit. Did I lay all of that out at the beginning? All right. And what comes next in terms of process? We have the special session that's supposed to be ending this week. I think we're all expecting that we'll have another one coming soon.
Yeah, I don't think anybody knows for sure exactly what comes next, but here's what we can know and what the options are. So on Friday, August 6th, this Friday, will be the last day of the first session. That will run, 30 days will have run at that point. It is real unclear what happens next. I'll lay out the options. The options at this point is either negotiations occur to try to work out something for how the second special session goes, or there's just an immediate recalling of a second special session immediately and no negotiations occur and just real no compromise. There isn't really an option not to have a second. The reason for that is the Article 10, which is that's some insider dope. The governor line item vetoed the entire budget for the entire legislative branch of government, which includes all sorts of things from the Sunset Commission to Legislative Council to obviously the staff of the legislators in both the House and the Senate. But there's several legislative agencies that handle the budget, handle redistricting, handle how bills are written and filed. And so there's literally hundreds of employees that have nothing to do with this whatsoever. They're just public servants that are about to have their jobs are, quite frankly, at risk, and they will immediately lose health benefits for their families. They will immediately lose a paycheck, and a lot of those positions are not that well paid, and so the ability to weather several months of not getting a check is going to be extremely burdensome, if not impossible, for a good number of them. And so we're really kind of in uncharted territory with having defunded the legislature, including defunding the sergeants who are effective with the police force. So that's an ironic thing that we've defunded the legislative police with this Article 10 veto. So we got to have another one. The funding is not really a legal way to restore that funding, with one big caveat. There is a lawsuit pending with the elected Texas Supreme Court. And there appears to be a bit of a game of chicken going on between the Texas Supreme Court and the House Democrats who are currently in the District of Columbia as to who blinks first. I think the comptroller has said somewhere around August 20th. Don't hold me to that exact date, but it is a couple of days before. So September 1st is when the cuts would take effect. But there's a logistical issue for the comptroller, which is the state's, the one who writes the checks, frankly, for the state. And the comptroller has signaled that there's actually a deadline kind of before the September 1st legal deadline where they have to implement the financial accounting. So to have it restored in time would actually be kind of an earlier date than even September 1st. It's somewhere kind of about a week to 10 days out in August. So there's this chicken game going on, and how that comes out, no one's really sure. In fact, as far as we know, it's not clear what the Democrats are going to do here in 5 days either. From what we can tell, they're still discussing that internally.
So this is certainly unprecedented in terms of the Article 10 funding. B, we're going to give several homework assignments during the course of this weekly witness episode. But if folks are making calls today, what do you hope those calls to legislators would include in terms of Article 10 funding?
Yeah, no matter what the party is of your legislator, the call is let's pressure the speaker to prioritize Article 10 funding. And what do we mean by that? In other words, just explicitly saying, I, the speaker, have the power to refer or not refer bills to committee. And the speaker is unfortunately in a position of needing to protect the institutions of the state and simply just say, we're not going to be doing anything until we have restored Article 10 funding. That's really the one play that is an intentional way out of this conundrum that we're in. And I want to take a minute to explain this. It's slightly arcane, but super important, right? Every summer I get the privilege of getting to talk to youth groups that come in for various mission trips and talk not just mission trips, but talk about the connection between charity and justice. And we talk about the legislative process. And I do an exercise with them, usually in the committee hearing rooms, where we do a mock committee hearing. And I pretend that I'm a legislator that needs something for my district. And the kids get to sit up on the dais and be legislators, and we're pretending we're going to move a bill through committee. And instead of actually using a bill, I use kind of an assortment of candies, Twix, Snickers, about 5 different kinds of candy. And I ask them, what's your favorite kind of candy? And they tend to on the podium. And then I give them their least favorite candy. Whatever that assortment is. And then I say, this candy represents your vote, and I'm going to win your vote on this bill. And then I negotiate with them for how many candies do I need to give you to get this candy in return. It's like trading votes, right? It's really quite, in some ways it's metaphorical, but really actually how bills get moved through committee quite often. And when I get to the very last one, he or she, the kid, has seen me make these deals, and I get the kid to give me the candy first before I give them the candy that they want. And then I say, and this child has just learned a very important lesson in integrity, because I then don't give the child the candy that I promised the child. And the whole point of this exercise is to stress the importance of integrity to the legislative process. Because if at any moment there's lying, any moment you don't deliver on what you say you're going to do, trust breaks down. And if trust breaks down in the legislative process, the legislature really can't function. And that is, I tell this story to say, this is why we have 57 people sitting in the District of Columbia right now, is that trust in the legislative process has completely broken down. There have been too many untrue things that have been said and done throughout the last 140 plus 30 days, to where there's really no trust in the process. So I say this and said the very best option is for the speaker to come out and say, we're going to do Article 10 funding and we will not move on any other item until this is done. And even then, I don't know that there's going to be enough trust to bring Democrats back to Texas, because as soon as they come back to enact Article 10 funding, they could be arrested. And all the rhetoric has said, we're going to do that. So again, I don't know that it's a magic bullet out of the conundrum to begin to get out of a very big conundrum that elected themselves in.
Yeah, I would put a fine as get Article 10 done. That's not as simple as the House. But funding, getting it done means that the House and both approve without amendments and the governor signs it. Texas Impact's position would be that you should tell members of the House, insist that the House not refer or hear any bills other than legislation to restore funding to the legislative branch, unsign that legislation. That's what the breakdown in trust means. Because Josh told a story, I'm going to tell a little story. I don't think anybody's on this call that I've had this conversation with, but there's a book called Best Friends for Francis that I read my kids, and I read it when I was little, and a lot of my friends have read it to their kids. And it is about the exact same thing, except instead of trading candy bars, it's two little girls who are trading tea sets. And one of them cheats the other one. And so the other one finds a way to get back. And the one who did cheating in the first place says, well, I thought I could trust you. And the other one says, yes, well, that's what happens when you cheat. We used to be friends, but now I have to be careful. And I think that's where the House is right now altogether in the process, where a lot of people are, is I used to trust you, but now I have to be careful. It takes a lot to rebuild trust. And when the stakes are high, it takes more. So when you call your House member, don't say, we think it's right to make sure there's funding for the legislative branch. Everybody thinks it's real important that there's funding for the legislative branch. You want to say, as a constituent, I urge you to demand that no bills be referred in the House other than legislation to reinstate Article 10 funding until that reinstatement has been signed by the governor. That's what it looks like now.
I'm going to guess you'll also make a friend of the person you're calling when you make that ask as well.
Sure, the legislative staff how is this fair?
Right. And I was thinking about that. Like, we've asked people to make thousands and thousands and thousands of telephone calls over the course of the legislative session to people who are being impacted by this at this very moment, right?
That's exactly right. And I would say, the other question you can ask, if you call a legislative office, ask them how they're doing and if they need anything.
Right. So that is certainly an issue that is important, and one that we hope will be taken up quickly the next time the legislature reconvenes for the next special session.
Which could be as soon as when, Josh?
Saturday.
Yeah. So that is certainly important, but the headline bill, the headline kind of issue for this legislative session, one that we've been talking about for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I guess months and months now, and we expect we'll continue to talk about on into the future, relates to the voting bills, right? The efforts to what we would describe as suppress votes in Texas. And Josh, the number one question that I get asked, like kind of when I talk to anybody, but my dad the other night when I talked to him on the telephone call asked me this question, is what's actually in the voting bills and why do we think it's so bad? And I know on social media, people keep posting, read the bill, and then they immediately post something that leads me to believe that they, in fact, have not read the bill. You have read the bills. Josh, thank you for doing that for all of us. And we're going to be working off a handout that B's going to post.
I posted it in the link here. When you click that link, it'll take you to the page. You need to scroll down a little bit, and when you get there, you'll download the PDF, and that's the handout.
So for folks who are listening to the podcast later, it's texasimpact.org/election-2. If you can't find it, email me at scott@texasimpact.org, and I'll email it to you. But walk us through. So I'll also say, Josh gave a 33-minute presentation on this on Saturday, and you can find the video to that in our YouTube channel. We're not looking for the 33-minute version of that now, Josh. We'll tell them they can go find that on YouTube. But hit some of the high points. What's in the bill, and what do we find problematic?
Yeah, legislators are saying a lot of things. But here's what's actually in the bill. And the top 10 things wrong with House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 1 as they currently stand. So the document is called The Top 10 Things Wrong with Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 3. And you can read it, you can find it online. It'll take a while to go through it, but right away the poll watcher provisions are top of the list. It empowers partisan poll watchers to intimidate, harass, and disrupt at the polling locations. It disempowers election judges. It creates numerous criminal and civil penalties. I think the civil ones are really pernicious and not being reported about. That leave judges in a state of fear for their personal liberty and their personal property. It exposes and risks personal information by allowing signature verification committees to take home any notes from their activities with mail-in ballots. Obviously, the poll watcher provisions risk that personal information as well, allowing them to have free movement all around the polling location. It has a provision for personal ID numbers, and this is one of the things that's not so much pernicious but just stupid. Frankly, it's one of the, and I say that because the idea of having an ID number isn't necessarily bad. It's their implementation of it that's ridiculous, where nobody remembers whether they used their social security or driver's license number when they registered to vote. But the way it's written is it requires it to match the carrier envelope, the application, and the registration all have to match with the exact same number. Even if if you used a valid social security number on one, but then you use a valid driver's license number on another, it would not match. And therefore, a plain reading of the way it's written would mean that ballot gets rejected, which the election administrators say would affect nearly 2 million voters. Signature verification, they want to expand the use of it. Unlike Georgia, where they did a personal ID number instead of signature verification, they're doing both and here in Texas. It's much more draconian. They want to be able to go back and look 25 years at an old signature. There are all sorts of logistical issues, including the pads they used 25 years ago when you e-signed it were slippery as can be and wouldn't look like your actual signature. Obviously, you have age issues that your signature changes with age, your medication, your medical condition. Signature verification is a junk science, frankly. Fixing mistakes, 6. There are opportunities to cure in the bill, but no opportunity to cure the ID provisions. And also the biggest problem is that the cure provisions require you to physically go down in person to cure it. And of course, mail-in ballots in Texas are limited. They are limited for those who are seniors and for those who are voters with disabilities. who already have mobility problems. At best, it's onerous, and at worst, you physically can't. My 98-year-old grandfather can't physically go down and stand in line downtown in Dallas. That's just not a thing that he can do. Canceled ballots. Every single election, there are ballots that never arrive in the mail. Something goes wrong. There is a process by which you can cancel your mail-in ballot. This provision would then force anybody who properly cancels a mail-in ballot to vote provisionally. That's not current law, and it risks the franchise of anybody who properly cancels their ballot and has it lost in the mail through no fault of their own. It codifies voter purges. We can get into the weeds of why, but basically it disenfranchises anybody it risks disenfranchising anybody who's a transient person. And I don't mean necessarily just the homeless. I mean college kids and oil field workers and people like that. There are vague vote harvesting provisions that risk criminalizing things, all sorts of criminal landmines for things that are otherwise innocuous behavior, like handing out your application to vote by mail. So not the ballot itself, just the application to vote by mail to your Sunday school class. And then there are some really vague and intimidating voter assistance provisions that risk trying to make communities who already have a natural fear of law enforcement be further in fear of voting, because it would then entangle them with law enforcement. So that's the top 10 things wrong with the bill. There is in the publication chapter and verse. People of faith love chapter and verse. Show me where it is. Well, we have put the actual sections of the bill in the longer part of the document, and you can see in much more detail all the things that I just went over. I'd like to talk for a minute about other scary provisions, because there's a very important thing to note here, and this goes to the trust factor that we're having. Senate Bill 7, which was the original bill from the regular session, came back from conference committee with 50 brand new pages that were never discussed on the House floor, never discussed on the Senate floor, never discussed in either committee of either chamber. Brand new things that 10 people got in a room and worked out that nobody had seen before, and with 48 hours notice said, we're going to vote up or down on it. That's not a good process. That's not how conference committees are supposed to work either. Some of those things that were in that bill were making it not criminal, but they were changing the hours to try to make it to where souls to the polls could not operate. There was a provision that would make it more easier to overturn an election. There was a third provision, redefining what it means to be disabled. In other words, the legislature didn't like what the Supreme Court had to say about the definition of disability, so they were going to throw it into further legal limbo. There was a fourth provision. Well, this wasn't actually in the conference committee report, but was at one time in Senate Bill 7. There were two other provisions that were in Senate Bill 7 initially when it was filed. One required a doctor's note to prove you were disabled, and then another provision allowed poll watchers to record you with their cell phones in the polling location, which is currently illegal. They were going to make it legal for poll watchers to intimidate you with their cell phone in a polling location. Those were provisions that were in Senate Bill 7. And then there were obviously, there were 80 different bills that made it through some point of the committee process. And I'll go through the top 5 most onerous ones that could make a comeback at any time. I mean, so again, nothing is really dead until sine die. And at any moment, the last day of the session, and at any moment, these provisions could come back. There was a provision that would prohibit you from returning your mail-in ballot in person. There was a bill that was going to shorten the ballot receipt deadline. And so those 2 bills have no good security argument whatsoever. They're just simply, we don't like that you brought it back to us in person, and we want a shorter ballot receipt deadline there's no good policy argument for it. 3, they wanted to criminalize handing out applications to vote by mail, period. So it was even broader than the current ballot harvesting provisions. There was a bill that allowed for armed election judges. So the election judges would be carrying guns in the polling location, even though it's a criminal. You can't carry guns in polling locations. It's if any of you have seen the movie Free State of Jones, which is about the 1870s, all the guys with shotguns in the polling location. I mean, it'd be looking like that. It's ridiculous. 5, centralizing voter registration with the Secretary of State's office. There were several bills to centralize that, which takes away important checks and balances. So that is currently what is in the legislation, what is not in the legislation but could come back. Those are the different provisions that we've all been wrestling with for the last 8 months.
So if people are making telephone calls to their elected representatives today, asking them to support voting rights, what's the short message that they should be asking of their representatives?
Just table these things until we restore Article 10. You've got to take away the hostage situation. The assault on democracy is within these bills, but then the vetoing of Article 10 is an assault on democracy itself, right? It's a policy argument. It's critical to the future of Texas's state governmental institutions that this can't be a power that the governor has, because next could be the judicial branch that gets vetoed. Or think ahead 10 years to 2030. Let's pretend that there's a Democratic governor in charge of the state, but a Republican legislature. What keeps that future governor from vetoing the redistricting maps in 2031 and then vetoing Article 10 to prevent the legislature from rewriting the map so it forces it to the court? There are all sorts of bad things that could come from creating this precedent. So it really, we've got to restore Article 10 and try to, the legislative branch needs to really reassert itself and its co-equalness as a branch of government in Texas.
That's true. Also, though, if people want to talk specifically about their concerns about voting, the link I just posted is the link to our current one-pager, which is relevant right now and probably going forward, because it's not specifically provisions. The handout, the first one we sent, and I said, here's Josh's handout, that's as of July 31st. And now as of August 2nd, because nothing has changed. But those are very particular provisions that are in the legislation that sits in the legislature right now. But when the legislature comes back for another special session, it won't be those bills anymore. So if you're hanging on to a one-pager from Texas Impact that says Senate Bill 7, that one-pager is no longer relevant, even though many of the provisions are still in these bills and we're still concerned about them. So the handout that I just posted is the most current one-pager on what Texas Impact would say needs to happen about election legislations, whether it's this special session, next special session, or the one after that, So they are more principles for what we do and don't want to see in legislation. Soon as there's another bill filed in another special session, we'll have another one-pager about it. But this one, do you right now, and this is something to talk to legislators about. Texas Impact is top shop for election content on Texas Impact's website. That's the page on the website.
So if you want to make those calls, the overarching message is to hit a reset button. There's no restarting this from where we're at, and more of the same is going to be more of the same. You got to hit a reset button on these bills. Yep. And have a bill that doesn't look like this current bill.
So hit a reset button and watch this space for more information. So B, I know that talking to our representatives about voting rights is really, really important. Article 10 funding is really, really important. But you've been making the argument for a couple of weeks that there's something that people can do right now that might be the most important thing. So what is your homework assignment for listeners today in relation to election infrastructure or election mobilization?
So I'm gonna try to share my screen real quick. We'll see. Give me 1 second to see if it works. Hang on just a second. Okay, So, yeah, the most important thing people can do right now today is actually probably not call their legislators. Their legislators are either in Washington, D.C. or in the Capitol, in both cases, not able to take action on any of the legislation that's before them. And we're glad that they're not taking action on it because we don't think they're good bills. But in the meantime, there are people who are trying to take action right now to make sure that we have elections going forward. So Scott, at the beginning, you said we've already made it to August. And think how fast that summer feels like it went. We have an election coming in the beginning of November, and that is not very long from now. That means that early voting will start halfway through October. It means that the county election administrators are planning right now for where they're going to have polling locations, who's going to work at those polling locations, how to get those people trained, how to be ready for contingencies in case there's legislation that passes and they have to train people about new stuff. So the most important thing that you can do today actually is call your county election administrator and tell them that you are ready to help them administer the upcoming elections. This handout, so I posted the link in the chat, and when I go back off of screen, sure, you'll be able to see it for sure. But this handout is not just an education piece. It's a workbook. So it's intended to be something that you can use, and you'll use it with women's group, you'll use it with your Sunday school class, you'll use it with your neighborhood. And even if you're not meeting in person, you can all do together right now. You need to think about how to connect with the administered at a very local level. They're administered in the county. Texas has 254 counties. So that means there's 254 different ways elections are administered. Are they basically the same? Yeah, I mean, they all are kind of basically the same with variation around the edges, but that variation can be really important. So there's no person or expert or organization that can tell you with a certainty exactly what the system is like in your county, except for your county officials. So you're going to connect with your county officials, and that includes connecting with your county party chairs, because even though you may not want to engage the election in a sort of hyper-partisan way, the county parties actually are integral to the administration of the election. That's not a partisan thing. That's just the way that elections run in the United States, is that the parties get to be involved so that there's fairness. So you want to connect with those people, and then, I'm not going to walk through every page of this in detail, you're going to ask them some questions and figure out how to participate. But the thing I want to show is, in this publication, we've given you the names and addresses and phone numbers and emails of every county election official in Texas. So there's 254. It's a lot. The type is pretty small. I apologize about that. You can find all this stuff on, and I'm sorry, you have to turn your head sideways a little bit too, right this second. You can find it on the Secretary of State's website. And if people move and update their information, there's a new contact person or whatever, that's where you'd see that, is on the Secretary of State's website. But this publication is something that you can download and share with your friends. And it's definitely something that you can use to get you started on volunteering to work the elections. A lot of times, y'all, we run into this thing where it's easy. It's not easy. Nothing's easy. I get nothing is easy right now. It doesn't feel like it. And if we weren't having COVID, still there would be reasons that things don't always feel easy because of stuff that's going on in our lives, or it's hot, or it's cold, or it's raining, or it's not raining, or whatever. But right now it feels easier to do something that takes 2 hours of your time on one day, like go to a rally or attend an online event, come to Weekly Witness, than to do something that is less intense, but you have to start earlier and keep up with it. So it won't occur to a lot of people that we're having elections until we're almost on top of them. And when we're almost on top of them, county administrators will already have to have decided how many polling locations can we staff in a county? How many people are we going to need? When are the trainings going to be? How many machines do we have? All of those things. If you tell someone today, I'm ready to work on the election, I know it's not for a while, but you can put my name down and I promise I'll be there when it's time, you will be doing them a kindness that will allow them to serve your whole county better, more robustly. They'll be excited to know that people are already getting ready to participate. So here's what I want. Here's what I want personally. And we talked about this, Scott and I talked about this earlier. I hope that at the end of September, the media are reporting. Right now, what they're reporting is election administrators are real concerned that they're not going to have enough poll workers in November and in the primaries next year and in the general next year. Wouldn't it be exciting? Here's what I hope, that in September, Texas media are reporting that county election administrators are saying they are awash in volunteers. They have people calling every day saying, how can I help? I want to be an election judge. I want to be a clerk, or I can't do those things, but I want to work on a phone hotline on election day, or I want to be a poll monitor. Can somebody hook me up with where to go to do that? Or go to your county party and say, I want to be a poll watcher so that I can help make sure that no poll watchers are getting over their station. So that's the hope, is that all over the state. And Josh, can you remind us how many people does it really take to administer elections in Texas?
Conservatively, 50,000.
And how many of those are volunteers, do we reckon?
Well, I mean, the overwhelming majority. I mean, volunteers, I mean, they are paid. So there's 10,000 polling locations in Texas. That every polling location needs at least a minimum of 4 poll workers. One is a primary judge, the other an alternate judge, and then 2 clerks. And that is at a minimum. If it's a large site, you may have more. But it takes at least, so that's 4 times 10,000, right? That's 40,000 people. And that's just the in-person polls on election day. I have not accounted for early voting. I have not accounted for the mail-in ballot folks that both do all the mailing and also the counting. Right. I have not accounted for the signature verification committees, the early voting ballot boards, all the county employees that are involved, and Secretary of State's employees as well. We're looking at easily 50,000 people that make elections work in Texas. Then that's just in Texas.
So it's kind of like, and Josh, you're not quite old, your daughter's not quite old enough for you to know exactly what this means, but kind of like when the PTA sends out the thing at the beginning of school saying carnival is coming up, right? If we have the school carnival at Halloween and not very many people sign up, it's going to be a nightmare. Not everybody's going to get to do all the things that they want to do. Nobody's going to be happy. There's going to be a lot of finger pointing at the end about if only somebody had done a better job, a lot of accusations and recriminations. But at the beginning of the year, if everybody says, yeah, I'll help a little bit, but I'll help, then carnival is fun. It's fun for everybody. Everybody's happy. There's nothing but, praise and attaboys all around. And that's what our elections are supposed to be like. Political campaigns are contests. There's winners and losers. But elections are a community activity. There's no winners and losers. If the election's not administered well, if it can't happen robustly, we all lose. And if it goes great, we all win.
Yeah, I mean, I want to add that, I mean, there's absolutely nothing in these bills that contemplate not having another election.
No.
Like we're not, I want to make sure we don't, it is a very frightening time, but I want to make sure that we don't confuse two very important concepts. There's erosion and then there's collapse. And those are different things. So when I was a kid, I guess I was about 4 years old, my grandfather bought this piece of property in East Texas because he wanted a place to go play with the grandkids. And it was deep in the woods, trees everywhere, brush, deep East Texas. And he cut trails and he would pull us around in this, we called it a tractor, but really it was a Ford riding lawnmower. And there was a trailer attached to it. And he'd pull us around. We were about 4 or 5 years old. And, but this property, you couldn't do a complete circle without this creek ran right up the middle of it, small creek, but it needed a bridge to be able to do a full circle around the property. And so he built a bridge. He was a World War II vet and he was super good with his hands. He built a house, so a bridge was nothing for him. But no matter how skilled you are at building a bridge across a creek, water is a powerful force, right? You can't just build it once and for all and assume it's going to be good. There's going to be erosion with time, and with rain, there's going to come erosion, and you got to check this bridge. Otherwise, it could collapse, and all the kids are in the back of the trailer, and the tractor collapses, and it's a very, very serious disaster. So you got to shore it up periodically. You have to replace the wood. You have to add some wood. You have to move some dirt. You have to make sure that the bridge is stable. And this bridge lasted for decades, and we did many repairs on it, but, we got older. My grandfather's 98 years old. I don't live an hour away. I'm in Austin, not Dallas. I'm 4 hours away. I have kids, a job, college. The bridge got neglected. And year after year with erosion and rot, eventually it did collapse. It had a big rain and it washed it away. I don't remember the exact design of the bridge, to tell you the truth. I remember what it looked like in my head roughly, but I don't remember the exact design, not that specificity. I don't even have the skill with tools that he had to be able to rebuild it. His father, my great-grandfather, literally built bridges for the U.S. highway system in the New Deal. I don't have that institutional knowledge. None of us have that institutional knowledge. So we have to shore up this bridge. And so the way you do that is your election administrator, your local county election administrator is the one that needs you to help shore up that bridge. And the way you protect our democratic institutions from erosion is you double down on your commitment to those institutions to make sure that they work. So we asked the election administrators, what do you need us to do? And they told us just explicitly, the number one priority is well-trained election workers. We have to have them. In a normal year, they're worried about shortages. And now we have the Delta variant. We have no idea what that's going to bring. There's the unpredictability of that. And then probably even more dangerous is the fear that has been created just by talking about these bills. People do not understand them. They do not understand what's in them. They know it's empowering poll workers, that it's disempowering the election administrators. It's scary. They're super worried. And so for at least 3 reasons, it is strategically critical you commit right now and you call and do these things right now to shore up your local county elections official and your local county elections office. One, your county needs you, and not just your county, your state, and not just your state, your country, and not just your country. Democracy itself needs you. The eyes of the world are on us, the world's oldest democracy. And if you think about the volatility of this moment, ponder on the volatility of the moment for a second, and then imagine what happens if one county somewhere botches it because they did not have enough election workers. Think about the fallout from that. 2, your community needs you. So it's not just a good thing you're doing for your county. If you're an election judge, you have credibility. Another way to say it is you have the lived experience of having been an election judge. And we're in a real crisis in this country where people cannot even tell what's true anymore. And when you have disinformation and no one knows what to believe, people understandably get hyper local. And I mean, like, think about masks as an example. Everyone's looking around to see what are people around me doing, because I can't trust the information that's out there. And they do what's kind of cultural with those around them. They do what others are doing. So think about your Sunday school classes. Think about your Thanksgiving dinners with your family. Think about your neighborhood association. All those groups have that one guy. And when that guy starts, we're talking about the guy that uses the F word, right? Fraud. And that one guy starts up, most people clam up. They're not going to argue. Maybe they don't know for sure. Maybe they're not confident enough to go at it. Maybe they just don't want the emotional experience of banging their head against the wall with that guy. You need to be able to say with authority, that's not how it works. I was an election judge. That couldn't happen. Here's why. And yeah, you're not going to change that one guy's mind. That's not possible. It's everyone else that you're talking to. That's your audience. Because you're inoculating the community, the hyper-local community, against things that aren't true. And then finally, voters need you to do this, because having enough election judges is critical to voter turnout. If a polling location does not have workers, it cannot open. Sometimes the counties will send out their overstretched employees to cover it, but that means it's opening late in a best case scenario. No matter what, that means the line has backed up, and long lines. And the forces of voter suppression know this is true. So for those 3 reasons, it's absolutely critical, no matter what happens over the next couple of weeks with the next special session or who knows how it comes out. It really doesn't matter, because there's going to be another election, and you have to shore up this bridge, because there's going to be another one, and it's got to be successful. And that's going to be dependent on you. And frankly, the way out of this horrible conundrum, I hate that I'm about to say this. It is necessary you call your legislator, but it's not necessarily the most helpful thing at this time. Legislators are a reflection of us, and they are reflecting what is out there in the community. And the way that you go about bringing about change on this issue of democracy, it's not an issue, the way we protect our democracy, is we go out and we do the work of democracy. And then we go out and we talk about the work of democracy. We bring others to do this. And bit by bit, that's how we get out of this conundrum.
It's interesting how many of our team and others are like using stories to paint the picture. And I'll just say, like, I immediately thought of the negative pieces of y'all's stories. I thought about, the kids crying at the carnival because there weren't enough people signed up. I mean, I did. I'm a parent. And I'm picturing like children falling.
Bridge collapsing, sure.
Yeah, and then the kids falling off the back of the tractor. But B-Man, when he did the legislative preview, legislative session preview a couple of weeks ago, told the story of elections should look like the 4th of July picnic, right? Where everybody from town comes together and eats and does all those things. And so you can also think about the positives of these stories, right? As people of faith, we should be people of hope, and think about all of those kids who are having a great time at the carnival, and all of those kids that are riding across the tractor over the bridge. And we can do that, right? When we all work together, when Texans of faith come together to help strengthen and empower these systems, democracy works. We just all have to play our part, right? And so I hope that we can challenge folks. Phil posted in the chat that we should have inflatables at polling locations. We'll see if that's
100% sure. That's what's been missing.
Bouncy houses for the kids.
we've done this for a long time and we'll continue to do it. We all just have to play our part to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to have strong elections. And two, we also need to be talking to our representatives about the election systems that we should expect our communities would have, right? And so any other closing thoughts from either of you two before we close it out today?
Just one. We've had a lot of conversations over the past 6 months, and I would say kind of accelerating into the special, where people were talking about congregations and talking about election reform legislation in a congregational setting. And what they said is, it seems so partisan. It just, voting seems like such a partisan issue. And first, that shouldn't be true, because like we said, elections are all of us. But the other thing is, there are parts of the election that congregations are uniquely qualified to help with. One is being a polling location, and we know that's true because we've got congregations all over the state already who serve as polling locations. But if you think about what your context in your local community is, I would urge you as a congregation, if you don't want to talk about the legislation, that's fine. But it's not fine if you don't want to talk about helping administer the county elections, because that's something that impacts the community that you live in, the community that you're located in. And, if it's supplying poll workers, if it's giving rides to people who can't get to the polls, if it's helping people understand processes like voter registration or like getting mail-in ballots or whatever, those are things that they aren't even legislative. They are just implementing a local thing in your community. Really, I think congregations can, at a time when, a lot we're talking about, oh my gosh, now here comes COVID again. What are we going to do? People are feeling frustrated and they thought they had a way forward, and now they're going to have to change gears again a little bit. This is something that the state needs, your county needs it. Like Josh says, American democracy needs it. And it's something that you can do without having to have a big in-person meeting. So congregations, all you social witness people, think about how you're going to help with the election. I predict that'll make you feel better.
I mean, yeah, democracy itself has become partisan. Then we've got a big problem.
Yeah.
We got a big problem nationally, but we've also got a problem theologically.
Right. Because
democracy is what we think the kingdom of God looks like. And if you don't believe that, then you need to learn your history of your particular faith community, because most of the councils and general conferences and the presbyteries, they were all experiments in democracy before we had the United States of America. It's called ecclesiastical polity, and your clergy study it in seminary, and they should be teaching it to you if they're not.
On that note,
again, if democracy is now partisan, we're in a very dark spot, and we need to have some theological reflection about that.
Somebody quote that and tweet it. Josh, thank y'all for the time today. I know we'll all be watching the legislature and the governor over the course of the next week, and probably have something else to report to you next week. But for now, thank you all for tuning in. I'd remind you once again that this work for voting and democracy is just beginning. We're going to be talking about this for a while. But the first step for today is to check out the resources at texasimpact.org, make a plan for how you can participate in protecting democracy and participating in elections in your county, and encouraging your friends and congregations to join you in doing that work. So keep an eye on texasimpact.org for more information and updates about ways you can engage there. You can always email me at scott@texasimpact.org if you need help with that. And remember, as we close out today, if you appreciate Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your congregation are members. You can join by going to texasimpact.org/join. Y'all, now is the time. The first special session is coming to an end, but this work will continue. So make sure that your friends and congregations have this content. Make sure to share it widely with them. And let's get to work. We'll see you next week.